your hand if you have a spot near you that is open. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And so as we begin this evening of commemoration, I just would like to remind you, if possible, to turn off the sound of your telephone. And for those in the back, there are a few more available seats somewhere in the middle. So just follow the hands. Great. Thank you. We will start with a moment of silence. Zachor, remember. We are gathered tonight, elders, children, rabbis, congregants, and guests, to honor the Holocaust survivors among us, who have demonstrated unimaginable resilience in spite of tremendous challenges, and who have the courage to share with us their story. Thank you for being here. Each of you is a miracle. Elie Wiesel once spoke of his father Shlomo, who did not survive, and said, "I thought one day I will come back and speak to him of times in which memory has become a sacred duty of all people of goodwill." And this is why we are here for. It is our sacred duty as a community. We must remember and never forget the horror of the Holocaust, the terrible events that led to the systematic and calculated extermination of our brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and teachers. 6 million Jews, among them 1.5 million children, in mass shooting, ghettos, slave labor, actions, starvation, diseases, uprisings, death marches, and worst of all, the killing machine of the death camps. May our presence here honor those who were dehumanized, beaten, starved, tormented, humiliated, and stripped of all dignity before they were murdered during those horrific years. By remembering, we give honor to the victims. May their souls be bound in the eternal bundle of life. תהא נשמתם צרורה בצרור החיים. Still in disbelief, we remember that the world was indifferent, watched from the sidelines and did very little to help. Therefore, we must not forget the righteous among the nations, 26,973 of them that Yad Vashem has recognized, and more who have remained nameless. These people risked their lives for liberty and helped the Jews during the Holocaust. Some have suffered death as a result. We are also here to remember that along with the Jews, there were Roma, homosexuals, people with disabilities, prisoners of war, underground resistance members, intellectuals, who also perished in the hands of the Nazis. Shamor. Along with remembering comes the promise and the duty to stand guard, to care, to bear witness, and to heal the wounds of past traumas, individual and collective. Because although after the Holocaust the world said never again, unfortunately, millions of people have been misplaced and massacred since then. We Jews, along with other persecuted people around the world and humanity at large, are still suffering from the ghost of the past. We all need to become aware and recognize that this ongoing pain is claiming life as recent as the anti-Semitic attack on the Chabad synagogue near San Diego on the last day of Passover. This attack impinges on every Jew's right to worship freely. None should be afraid to worship. No one should pray in fear. Not in Pittsburgh, not in Christchurch, not in the black churches in the south, not in Sri Lanka, and now Poway. Words really fail us. Again and again, blood in places of prayer. I would like to ask if there is here people from other faith traditions and invite them to please stand up if anyone is here. Thank you. Thank you for your solidarity and for being here with us tonight. Because together we need to do our best to heal this madness. When we voice our sadness and anger at the atrocities that innocent people have endured, we call ourselves and others to action. By voicing our opposition to hatred, we stand against anti-Semitism and prejudice. By acting in the memory of those murdered, we begin to feel the brokenness of our world and are moved to create a new beginning. This day, here and in Israel, where the sound of a siren lasts 2 full minutes and brings to a stop traffic and pedestrians throughout the land. This day is dedicated to remember this unspeakable chapter in our Jewish and human history, a chapter that still reverberates in our collective memory as a deep wound, both for our survivors and the generations that follow. Therefore we say, Zachor v'Shamor, remember and heal, because the present cries for healing. And it is upon us to be aware and together mend these deep-rooted traumas to avoid perpetuating them now and in the future.
Words on the first page of your program. You remember the words of Hamasenesh. In the face of difficulty, she saw what she was grateful for in the world. Eli, Eli, Shelo Yigamer Le'olam, Achol Rishru shel hamayim ve'rak shamayim tfilat ha'adam ha'kol ve'hayam Rishru shel hamayim ve'rak shamayim tfilat ha'adam my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. This year we are blessed to invite 6 survivors from our community who will each light a candle in memory of the 6 million Jews who were slaughtered during the Holocaust. Along with them, we are inviting 6 second-generation survivors, that is, their own children or children of other survivors, who will introduce them with a few words. Both the first and the second-generation survivors have experienced a different kind of trauma, which we wish to acknowledge with this ritual. And we'll invite the pairs up one at a time. I'd like to invite Bill Safran and Elise Berlin.
Hello. I'd like to introduce William Safran. Bill was born in Dresden, Germany in 1930. By 1942, his family was in the Riga, Latvia ghetto, then forced labor camp in Riga. Subsequently, the Stutthof concentration camp in Gdansk, Poland. Bill was liberated by the Soviets on March 23, 1945. Bill has extraordinary accomplishments. He is a survivor, a father, a husband, a grandfather, and an educator at CU for 38 years. The speaker of 6 languages. I'm sure you'll appreciate hearing his own words a little later on in English.
Joseph Uhas and Jenny Schwartz.
Hi, I'm introducing my dad, Joseph Juhas. He was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1938. He survived the Holocaust in the cellar of the home he grew up in there. He and his family left Hungary in 1948 as refugees of communism. He came to New York in 1951 and to Boulder in 1974. He is a psychologist, professor emeritus at the University of Colorado Boulder in Denver. I have been lucky enough to be able to go back to Budapest with my dad twice. I've been in the cellar, where he survived. And so I have experienced firsthand some of his stories. But as my dad has eloquently stated, what are stories to me and to many of us are memories to him. And as a psychologist myself, I strongly believe that there's a qualitative difference between story and memory. So, even though I have experienced his stories firsthand, that's not the same thing. So, I know it's up to me because there is so much bravery in his memory, his willingness to remember, that it is up to me to use his stories so that his memories will not be in vain.
Arnold Fridland and David Fridland.
Good evening. So my father, Arnold Friedland, wow, that was amazing, by the way. Was born in Belgium. Was a hidden child there. Luckily, after the war, he was able to make Aliyah to the state of Israel in 1949 with his orphanage. A few years later, he joined his grandmother, one of the few surviving members of our family, in Montreal, where he attended night school to earn his high school diploma, eventually earned his PhD in biochemistry from McGill. He then came to the United States to do research in pharmacology, working on a number of life-saving drugs that are still in use today. His work later brought him here to Boulder, where I was raised.
Otto Verdoner and David Verdoner.
I had to find it on the paper, too many sides. My father, Amsterdam, Holland, called Hilversum in 1939. At the age of 3, in 1942, he moved to a village called Diepenveen, where he was in open hiding. There was a conversation with a neighbor, where the neighbor said, "Clearly we see he is your cousin," as an understanding that he would be cared for and supported in the community. He lived with his family until the age of 7 when the war ended. And he, his father, and his 2 sisters were fortunate enough to move to Queens. We are very thankful for the kindness of strangers and family that have allowed us to be here today.
Maria Kranz and Evie Cohn. I am not Maria's daughter, and my parents are no longer living, and they escaped Austria. I was asked to say just 3 or 4 sentences, and it was so hard to figure out what to say about Maria, and I didn't even think about what to say about me. But Maria is one of the youngest Holocaust survivors. She was born in 1944, 6 weeks early, in a bomb shelter in Hungary. So her survival of not only her birth, but the first year of her life is a real miracle. And Maria states that she can only assume that it was so that she could be a witness to the world. Because after the Nazis had taken over Hungary, she had to live under the oppression of the communists. 38 members of her family did not survive, and they were among at least 440,000 Jewish Hungarians. I think she'd said a number 600,000, it's a lot, who perished. So, I know she was able to get to Venezuela eventually, she and her mother, and then eventually get to the United States. And I'm glad that she has writing skills, because she's very humble. She doesn't care about anybody buying the book, but I want you to look in the library, because she did document it, because we need the documentation of the personal stories. So I'm very glad to be invited to meet her and introduce her. Henry Karplus and Serene Karplus.
My father, Henry Karplus, was born in 1925 in Berlin. He was 12 years old when Kristallnacht hit, and that was in November. He turned 13 in February, 3 months later, and celebrated his bar mitzvah in a community center because there were no synagogues. 3 months after that, he stepped onto the platform of a kinder transport train along with his 15-month younger sister, and the two of them rode through the Hook of Holland to England. He had an uncle there, and after the kids were sent off to boarding school, that summer the uncle managed to get out his parents. They left everything behind, and they arrived safely in England. They were reunited as a family. Recently at a play in Denver about the Kindertransport survivors, we learned that he was one of very few who ever saw his parents again. For this, he's very grateful. And after his schooling in England, he married a woman that he met working there, came to America to work, had 4 children, 5 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren, and has lived in Boulder the last 5 years. The one thing that I must speak for Henry about, I'm sure he could say this himself, is that he lives in constant gratitude. And he is always thankful to all the people who have helped him and who help him since. And contrary to what so many believe, there were, as you said, many thousands who did help. And 10,000 children were rescued by the British, the one country that reached out their arms to these refugee children at that time. And we're always grateful to them for that as well.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to call up Pastor Janet, who is the pastor of Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church. She reminds us of the heroic, righteous Gentiles who risked their lives to save Jews from the Nazis. All are welcome at her church. The Renewal Synagogue, Pardes Levavot, and many other groups live there, meet there. Maybe they feel like they live there. Reverend Kettering says, we're in the politics of grace, of sharing God's love.
Lighting the 8th candle for the establishment of the State of Israel is Esther Benari Altman, the Education Director at Bonei Shalom, 2nd generation Holocaust survivor. Esther was born and raised in Israel. She was named after her grandmother, who perished in the Holocaust. Esther's mother, Sarah Zilberberg Altman, Zichronah Livracha, was born in Radom, Poland. Sarah survived Auschwitz and came to Israel immediately after the war in 1945. Her father, Arno Altman, Zichronah Livracha, escaped Austria and came to Israel in 1938. Both her parents were Zionists and builders of the State of Israel.
A Czech Jew, was just 21 years old when he was transported from his home in Prague
to the Theresienstadt concentration camp. That was April of 1942. 2 months after his arrival at Theresienstadt, he wrote the poem, The Butterfly, on a thin piece of paper. On September 29th, just 3.5 months after his arrival at Theresienstadt, he was deported to Auschwitz, and he perished there. After the liberation of Czechoslovakia, that thin piece of paper with the poem The Butterfly was found. Tonight I share Pavel Frieden's poem with you. The last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzlingly yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone. Such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I've lived in here, penned up inside the ghetto. But I have found my people here. The dandelions call to me, and the white chestnut branches in the court. Only I never saw the butterfly, another butterfly. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto.
I would like to invite Professor Emeritus Bill Safran, who will share with us a personal story about surviving the camps.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
In January 1933, when Hitler came to power, I was 2.5 years old. I lived under the Nazi regime until its end in the spring of 1945.